But where do you want to start?
Yeah, Jordan, I thought we'd go ahead and start with kind of just a quick update for kind of the big name players that Clemson's tracking on the recruiting trail right now. I know Clemson fans out there got a ton of questions. And, some of us have concerns about, the lack of momentum out of the big recruiting weekend that we had seen in the previous two iterations of this big June recruiting weekend that Clemson has been doing for a couple years now. Now comes this third iteration of it. We're not quite seeing the same momentum that we saw out of the previous 2 years. And there's probably a couple reasons for that. There's just some guys that are not willing to shut it down right now. They want to keep their options open. They want to go through all of their official visits. And that's kind of what's happening right now. But as you guys all know, the dead period for recruiting is quickly approaching, right? So after this weekend, the NCAA will be in a dead period from June 24th to July 24th. So a 30-day, month-long dead period will happen after this weekend. So it's going to be a big weekend, not for Clemson recruits coming to Clemson, but them going to other universities on official visits. And some of the big names out there is obviously David Sanders Jr., first and foremost, the big five-star offensive tackle recruit for the Clemson Tigers. He visits Ohio State this weekend. Bryce Davis, unfortunately, is visiting South Carolina this weekend. I don't know why he's doing that. Everybody knows he's not going to South Carolina, but whatever. Go ahead and go on unofficial to South Carolina. We'll forgive you for it. Safety Jordan Young is going to Michigan. He was also at NC State the middle of this week. Cortez Mills, big four-star wide receiver that Clemson is hopefully going to land. He canceled his Miami official visit and decided that he will use that official visit for LSU. So he's heading down to LSU this weekend to go see what they got going on, and they're probably going to make a pretty big push for him, I would assume. Gregory Xavier Thomas is taking an official to Florida State. Mario Nash Jr. going to Mississippi State. Hardy Watts going to Michigan. That's a big one to watch. Michigan's going to make a huge push for Hardy Watts. They're probably, honestly, the leader at this point, and it could spell trouble for them, for at least for Clemson, heading out of this weekend if you're hoping for Clemson to land Hardy Watts, four-star interior offensive lineman. Another big one headed to Michigan. Michigan is going to be our arch enemy this weekend. You guys, Moose, go ahead and cover your ears in the comment section. I know you're in here, but we got to hope for you saw all those technical difficulties that happened to us at the beginning of the show. That's how we got to hope the Michigan official visit weekend goes this weekend.
Yeah.
It's a comedy of errors. And they got a whole bunch of issues just like we just had because
I hope they spell Hardy Watts' name wrong.
Yeah, I hope they spelled a name wrong. I hope they get his mom's name wrong. They get his mom's name wrong. They just mess it all up, right? Hand out the wrong programs, all of that stuff. But Hardy Watts heading up to Michigan, I should say. Kamar Archie heading up to Michigan as well. That's another big one. Rutgers is in the mix for him as well. So probably more so than Michigan. Rutgers is in the mix, believe it or not. Both northern guys, both guys that are familiar with the area up there. So look for that to be a obstacle, at least for Clemson to overcome. Not that they can't, but it's just something to note. Max Buchanan headed to Penn State. And then Samari Reid headed to Penn State as well. So that's kind of, Jordan, the list, pretty long list of some key guys in this recruiting class coming up that are heading to the opposition, right? I mentioned all the three guys headed to Michigan. So what are your kind of thoughts on this last official visit weekend prior to the dead period? What do some of these kind of spell for Clemson? I know some of these guys are, Clemson may be somewhat leading for some of them. They may not be leading for other. So what are your kind of thoughts on all these guys? And do you see any trouble coming out of this weekend for the Clemson Tigers and some of these recruits?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, so there's a lot to kind of dive in here, and there's a lot of different things to watch with a number of the guys that you listed. Obviously, everybody, any Clemson fan listening, they've been wanting to know, what's going on with David Sanders, what's the kind of the lowdown there. This visit this weekend to Ohio State is very big, and I think we're going to learn a lot about where things sit coming out. Obviously he was at Tennessee this past weekend, another major player. Some may say he's the leader currently for David Sanders. And Ohio State is right there and then making a massive push as well. And they have they've been pretty persuasive on the recruiting trail this cycle for a number of reasons. So this visit could be very instructive to how that recruitment is sort of shaping out as we get closer to the finish line. Bryce Davis, you mentioned heading to South Carolina. I don't, Beamer, to Beamer's credit, he does do a good job on official visits, and he does make, the guys feel wanted. And he does, I mean, they do put on put together a good presentation, as far as when they host guys. But this has been a Clemson-Georgia battle. It's still, I expect it to still be a Clemson-Georgia battle. And I think Georgia has the edge right now. I think there are a lot of things that Bryce likes about Clemson. And I think there are a lot of things pulling him in Clemson's direction. But, I think, kind of the people around him, there are a lot of things, a lot of different factors that are kind of factoring into, where he may end up. And right now I feel like Georgia's in the best position. You mentioned safety Jordan Young, 4-star out of Monroe. Heading to Michigan, I think it's a big visit. I think they could potentially make some noise, but I still like where Clemson sits a ton. He was at NC State during the midweek as well, as you mentioned. I still think Clemson is in the driver's seat right now. They just kind of have to weather the storm, let him go through the process, and I think I'd lean towards him being in the class at the end of the day more than I don't. But we'll see. Michigan has definitely done some big things on their official visit weekends. So who knows? Maybe they make things interesting. You mentioned 4-star wide receiver Cortez Mills. That I think is I think right now it's an Oklahoma-Clemson battle. I think that's kind of what's been framed. He was at Oklahoma this past weekend, and they made a tremendous impression. So I think it's going to come down to those two schools. This LSU visit, we'll see. But I still think Clemson and Oklahoma are the two right now. He's set to make a decision. I believe July. I think July 4th. Don't quote me on that. I know it's in July. Zay Thomas heading to Florida State this weekend. Clemson likes him a lot as an oversign at corner. So I don't really expect him to end up in the class. I'm sure you've seen a lot of crystal balls in favor of Florida State. I think that's where he ends up. His dad is a huge FSU guy. He's right down the road. Like it's pretty much a layup, I would say, for Florida State. He's set to announce his commitment at the end of the month. I think Florida State is in the driver's seat there. Anquan Fegans, not really tracking him at this point. That hasn't been a relationship that has really gone much of anywhere since the official visit weekend. I don't expect him to end up in the class. 4-star interior offensive lineman Mario Nash. I think he's an interesting one. His timeline is a lot slower than a lot of the other guys on this list. I don't really expect him to make a decision until the season, probably into the season. But I think he's a guy that Clemson could circle back around on if some of their other targets go elsewhere. And I do like his tape a lot. Matt Luke has a lot of ties to the state of Mississippi, which is where he's from. And so I do think that he's one to watch moving forward, and we'll kind of see how things shake up, and he might be one that Clemson circles back around to. You mentioned Hardy Watts heading to Michigan. I think Michigan is in the driver's seat. and I think they are pretty definitively in the driver's seat at this point.
Yeah,
would not be surprised if he left Michigan as a Michigan commit.
He probably commits this weekend to Michigan before he leaves campus, I would assume.
Yeah. You mentioned linebacker Kamar Archie. This one has been a really interesting one to track because his recruitment hasn't been like. I think just because having Rutgers in the conversation is always going to raise some eyebrows. Obviously, he's from New Jersey, so it makes sense to a degree. But when you look at the schools he's interested in, Rutgers, Michigan, and Clemson, there's a wide range there. But Rutgers really wants him to stay in state.
Mm-hmm.
They are pushing hard to keep him in state, and he does have a lot of ties and close connections there. So I don't want to say that Rutgers is the leader right now because I still think that's still kind of shaping out, but they are a major player in this recruitment. And I think Clemson is as well. So
and Clemson,
I think it's still tight right now.
Clemson made a big push for him, right? I mean, he was the sole linebacker at the big official visit weekend. They obviously did that on purpose to make sure that he understood that how much of a priority he was for them in this class and how much they wanted him to commit to the Tigers. So I think there's something to be said about that. He was interviewed about that after he left Clemson, and that definitely made an impact on him being the only linebacker at the official visit weekend. But again, those kind of hometown ties, if you will, those are always uphill battles. I mean, not that Clemson won't win it, but it certainly makes it difficult and definitely makes it hard to predict.
A three-star interior offensive lineman, Max Buchanan, heading to Penn State. I think this is a three-team race between Florida State, Penn State, and Clemson. So this will be an instructive visit for how his recruitment is shaping out. I think Florida State has the lead right now, I would say. But we'll see kind of how, things shake out as we reach the finish line. And then three-star wide receiver Samari Reid. He's been a interesting one to track as well because there just hasn't been a ton, come out about him. He's kept his recruitment really, really low key. It's kind of strange. I say three-star, but I think he's a four-star on some other sites. He's kind of on that borderline. But Clemson does really like him and, would like to have him in the class, especially if they can't land Cortez Mills. So we'll kind of see how, this Penn State visit goes. He's a guy that has been flying under the radar this entire time. And, so it's been kind of hard to get a read on his recruitment to a degree. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But that kind of covers the major, targets and kind of where Clemson sits with a lot of them. Some positive news and obviously some not so positive news.
Absolutely.
But again, recruiting is a very fluid game. We're still in June, and we'll kind of see what happens because surprises happen all the time. And we think about the guys that we think we have, and then they end up going elsewhere. But vice versa has happened a ton as well. So we'll kind of see what happens there.
Right. Absolutely. Look, a lot of time left on the clock, a lot of, back and forth with these recruits. The coaching staff will continue to engage, but this will definitely be a huge weekend for a lot of big time recruits that Clemson's tracking right now. I think we'll have maybe some clearer pictures after this weekend about where we need to go as it pertains to this class, because I think there's a possibility that some things get shifted possibly in our way, and then maybe in a couple other situations a different way where we know we have to pivot and kind of adjust fire and go towards a different direction when it comes to some of these position groups and these guys that are probably going to commit this weekend. So we'll see how it all shakes out. It's going to be exciting to watch. Again, no disrespect, Moose, but I hope you guys have the worst official visit weekend of all time in Michigan history. I know you don't want to hear that, but for selfish reasons, I just I got to root for that. So
it's nothing personal.
Nothing personal,
John asked this at the beginning of the show. Is it time to freak out about recruiting yet? Ha ha ha! I'm spending too much time on fan sites. Yeah, no, it's not time to freak out. It's never time to freak out in June about recruiting for. I mean, it's kind of funny because Clemson is sitting with a top 5 class right now, so it's like we're kind of we're kind of a lot of fans are ready to jump off the bridge because some of our remaining targets are trending elsewhere, but. This is always recruiting is a marathon, not a sprint. And, Clemson has already done a lot of good work. I really love where the class is right now. So, even if you don't get, the guys that you want, it's going to work out in the end. Clemson is still a very attractive place to play. They have other guys on the board, and this is always it's always the long game. It's not how many guys can you get in the month of June, even though it's really fun to get those string of guys in the month of June, like we have the past couple cycles. But obviously it's going to be a slower burn this go around. And I think it's partially because you did have an earlier run, earlier in the year that you don't, Clemson hasn't typically had. So I think kind of mentally it's kind of messed with some of the fan base too, because it's like, this time last cycle we did not have like 14 commits. I think we were sitting at, oh man, I think we maybe had 7, 8, something like that. You're muted again.
Sorry, I keep muting myself and then forgetting that I mute myself.
Yeah, but what were you saying?
I was just saying that you're right. It was a much lower number this time last recruiting cycle, which is why that kind of spurt of recruits that we got out of the official visit weekend was such a huge deal for us. But again, remember, this time last season we were also missing on every offensive lineman outside of Ronan O'Connell that we went after as well. So, it's never over. We ended up putting together a pretty adequate, I would say, recruiting class along the offensive line. And this time last year, it was not looking promising. But we closed it out well, and it ended up being, pretty good.